Commissioner Barry,
Here.
Commissioner Klein,
Here.
Commissioner Uri,
Here.
Commissioner Gregoire, here. Commissioner Wellens. I want to state for the record he's running late, about 20 minutes, but we have a quorum.
Okay, thank you. Any public comments? No.
Not that I know of. No public comments? No, sir, no public comments.
All right. First thing we need to do is approval of the minutes from July 26th. Give you guys a minute to look them over.
Move to approve.
So, second. Second. All in favor? Aye. Any opposed?
Aye.
Okay. The minutes are approved. We're going to go get right into it and ask Alan to come up and go through the 2018-2019 budget.
Actually, Commissioner Barry,
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. As President and CEO of Broward Health, I am pleased to commence the fiscal year 2019 budget discussion. The management team has produced a detailed, thoughtful plan that strategically positions Broward Health to continue to expand its services, enhance quality of care, improve access, and reduce our reliance on taxpayer subsidy. Before Alan Goldsmith, our Chief Financial Officer, expands on the details of the plan, it is important for us to provide insight into the prior year's landscape. Upon my arrival as interim CEO in fiscal year 17, Broward Health had ended the year with a net loss from operations of about $149 million. Shortly after, it was announced that Medicaid funding would be significantly reduced by over $20 million for fiscal year 18. These two factors alone quickly set the tone for how we would launch the first year of our 3-year strategic plan. Our debt structure at the time was unstable and provided significant risk to our cash position. Being the interim CEO, I quickly realized that we had an obligation to our community to make changes quickly. We immediately organized a talented, high-performing leadership team and adopted an operational plan designed to right the course. Within 10 months, the team identified over $31 million of savings, refinanced debt, and improved operations, resulting in $15 million of savings, or a 10% improvement over prior year. Keeping our patients at the forefront of every decision, these operational improvements were achieved in parallel with key expansion projects, including our Broward Health North ER expansion, our Coral Springs Tower expansion, and Broward Health Medical Center, NICU, Neonatal Intensive Care Unit expansions. The healthcare sector is never easy, and this past year has been no exception. The management team, along with the Board of Commissioners, has been faced with complicated issues demanding difficult decisions. I am confident that the following budget discussion will illustrate that our team has stayed true to our mission, ensuring the residents of our community have the access to care they deserve, as well as lessening our dependence on our taxpayers. With that, I will turn over to my team to lead the discussions.
Thank you, Ms. Capasso. As Ms. Capasso said, 18, we really looked at that as a stabilization year. We feel strongly with the leadership recruited to Broward, as well as the development of leaders that were already here, that our strategic plan for 19, 20, and 21 balances a reduction in taxpayer subsidies with the expansion of access of quality care. Now let's get into the details. So the proposed budget year 19, and I want to make a disclaimer, this is the operating budget that we have in our system currently, and we have a millage rate in there that's a placeholder. Obviously, we have a tax hearing today at 5:30 and another tax hearing at the end of September that will really set the rate, but for illustration purposes, we put in a placeholder in there that we feel incorporates the resolution made at the last meeting, as well as the savings that we identified that we feel comfortable with moving forward. So I just wanted to start off the meeting kind of with that in mind. So if you look, we expect to have a total operating loss of $127.1, and that's $7.6 million better than prior year, or 5.6. We continue to focus on financial viability of the system, keeping quality patient care at the forefront of all our decisions. The Budget 19 invests in quality of care by adding an intensivist program, which is best practice by Leapfrog standards. We've added teletracking, which is a patient flow system, and we improve staffing ratios to make sure that the nursing staff runs within best practice. Moving right along into the details, I'm on slide 3 right now. If you look, there's some key things I want to point out. Fees other is going up. That is mostly accounted for in marketing budget, which is 3.6. We haven't done, because of kind of the last couple of years, we haven't spent a lot of money in marketing. So we're increasing marketing that is tied to our strategic plan of about 3.6 million. That is both at the corporate level, and that's also both at the facility level, has an individual marketing budget. We're looking to put in some HR business intelligence of about $1 million. That's really going to help with our process flow and being able to gather talent in more quickly. We've also added about $200,000 in international program for a software program to track the international visits and what they're doing, so we can provide a better transparency to our international program. And then the big one is physician coding, which is a significant risk from a compliance perspective and ties to our OIG, and that's going to cost us in the range of about $2.3 million. So that's the 8.6 is really where the fees are. That kind of makes up the material.
Please make sure you reference the page number.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry. I'm on page 3.
Okay, and then also reference the line item you're speaking about.
Page 3, line 5, which is the 8.9. Okay. Page 3, line 4, which is physician fees. As you know, we have locums tenants in there that we had to pay, so that's costing us an extra $300,000. On-call fees have gone up, so that's costing us about $1.7 million. This is all inflation. This is all part of a normal budget. And then the intensivist program that I talked about that is providing better quality of care for our patients is costing us $3.1. That intensivist program, in my opinion, is very critical to our strategic plan in the up and coming years. We need to invest in it now, and we need to invest in our system to provide better quality care in the future. And once again, that's what Beverly Capasso tells us on an everyday basis: quality of care. How are we going to do increase quality? And this budget reflects that. The rest of it, I'm on line 2 now. Salaries. That's made up of.
I don't really want to keep interrupting you, but I would like Ms. Capasso and you to please, and maybe whoever else needs to, explain the intensivist program to the group here, what it's doing. It's one of the areas that I had some concerns about. I think you've made some changes, and it would be good for the board to understand that a little bit more thoroughly.
I'll take a stab at that. So 50% of the hospitals in America have closed intensivist programs. The advent of which started this really was around Leapfrog. Leapfrog uses empirical data that's tied to outcomes. So what they do is they take a look at the factors that definitively affect patient care. So they have found that when the implemented recommendations by Leapfrog for an intensivist group, which includes certain things like response to a phone call within 5 minutes, closed group, they have to be there at least 8 hours a day, that can result in up to a 20% reduction in mortality in the ICUs. And we have seen that in the hospitals that have implemented the intensivist groups properly. So part of improving the quality of care, reducing the mortality, and frankly getting our Leapfrog letter grade a score higher is implementing the intensivist groups. So, there was an RFP done some years ago to do this, and we have now just extended that to the rest of the facilities. So there's an RFP out right now for intensivist groups at BHIP, Coral Springs, and Broward Health North. It does, as a note, exclude the trauma ICUs because that's currently covered by the trauma groups already. And then at Medical Center, we're going down the path of entering into a contract with the group that won the RFP previously, but right now it's in contract negotiation. So that's the premise behind why we want to do it, and kind of the history of what we've done and where we are now.
Is normal practice that you see around the country to outsource or to insource the intensivists?
The majority of them are outsourced. There are some that are insourced, but the vast majority, I'd say greater than 90% of the intensivist groups are outsourced to a group.
Okay. Good. All right.
Thank you.
The next line item is on slide 3, line 2, which is salaries. This is a $18.4 million increase year over year. This is takes into account 254 more additional FTEs that I referenced earlier, that we increased staffing grids to make sure that we are, or improve staffing grids to make sure that we're running at best practice. There's a merit increase in there, a standard inflation merit increase of just over 2%. And then there was the market adjustment that we had talked about at the last HR meeting for some employees that we felt that we were under the market, that we built into this budget. So that's the makeup of why the salaries is going up, as well as just the normal volume is increasing. So if volume increases, obviously you're going to have more labor in the hospitals. Benefits is going down, one, because we're taking a full year of the pharmacy savings. Some of the savings that Jen had presented in the last HR meeting are in that number, as well as there was a GASB change in our numbers year over year, and we started to pay ourselves less. So you're going to take a pickup in benefits, and then you're going to take a reduction in revenue and a pickup in benefits. It's right pocket, left pocket. It washes. So that's why you see a significant reduction in the benefit line.
Let me ask you a question.
Yes, sir.
On the increase in salaries, I know we have had a focus on decreasing overtime. And, where is the reduction in overtime?
Yes. So I was going to talk about it on the next page, but we can.
I think they kind of go hand in hand.
Yes.
And I think it'd be also good, if you don't mind, addressing some of the productivity and efficiencies that come from having regular staff, not overtime, and not contract staff, and so on.
Sure. I'll take the overtime, and then we'll dive into, Beth can talk more from a nursing perspective of the quality of care, and we'll go from there. So I'm sure you recall, every month I've talked to you about, we have a mission to reduce the overtime. It was one of our biggest strategic goals. We started the year off at 5.19 is where we ended in 17. When I got here, it was all the way up to 6.5. So we put together a strategic plan. We worked on a bi-weekly basis with each one of the leaders. We started off the meeting with the expectation is to reduce overtime, but the expectation can never be to reduce staffing grids. We need to keep our staffing grids where they need to be to run safe, but we need to reduce the overtime. And so we did slowly but surely, month over month. It took us a little longer because we made sure that we ran safe, but we got it down to 4.29 when we started at 7.5. And by the end of the year, we were running below 2%, which was our goal, and what is we promised to the Board of Commissioners. So this year, we're running at 2.03 because we expect to continue to stay at 2% for the whole year, and that's almost a $5 million savings right to the bottom line for not paying premium pay year over year.
And I think to add to that, Commissioner Uri, it's all about quality. When you have staff that are working overtime, 20 hours a week, we'll say, they're not as bright as they should be, right? They're exhausted. And our quality of care actually is on the rise. So it's coinciding with the overtime going down and the quality of care is going up. You never want to, our contract labor is terrific, but they're not Broward Health employees. I'm not saying they're not as committed, but typically you find that your own employees, I've got the buy-in. So it's a real win financially, but also on a quality metric.
So a good way
I
to
assume productivity.
Yeah,
Obviously,
they're more
people
efficient.
are coming in and out of the system that aren't used to working with whoever they're working with, but they don't know
Of course.
exactly where everything
course.
is. And,
Right.
so-
You're right. There's a good synergy with your own staff when you have people that are coming in 8 hours, 12 hours. You're busy helping them, acclimating them. Where this your own staff, they're there.
So think of it like when you leave here tonight at 8 o'clock. Think about how you feel right
It's gonna be
now.
before 8 o'clock.
Think about how you feel right now, and then think about when you leave today at 8 o'clock, and think about that's what it does to when they're overworked. They're making mistakes. They're not as on point. So think about that when you leave tonight, and that's sort of.
Are you saying that we're less effective at 8 o'clock after all this?
That's when we have our good exhibits going
Some
through.
people that say that.
I'm taking notes.
Well, I think we'll all be a little more fatigued. But just think about that when you leave, as sort of that's how a nurse is after working 48 to 60 hours a week.
Right.
That's sort of.
I guess what I'm ultimately trying to understand is the investment, if you will, in salaries or in full-time folks, how that translates from an 18.4 increase in salaries on a net basis, right? We're reducing overtime, we're hopefully increasing productivity and efficiency, reducing some of the expense and cost of contract labor. Where does that ultimately shake out in the current year, which of course is important, but then over time, right? We can make investments today that yield efficiencies tomorrow, all with quality of care at the forefront, right? And that's what I'm
I
trying
think that's
to.
it, Commissioner, is that it's the quality of care. We have our own employees. We know that they're going to be into our system. They'll know what we're supposed to do. It's more efficient to have your own staff. So why it does seem like, labor goes up every year. It's just kind of the way it is. But I really believe that our quality of care, we've already seen it improve, right? And that's part of our mission, is to deliver the highest quality of care we can to our patients and community. And I really feel with the investment in the staff, in our own Broward Health staff, it is only going to enhance the care we give, the care we deliver.
Ask your question.
Sure.
So I'm looking at, I have my notes from our call on Friday. Is there any material changes to the numbers other than I see you put another variance column in?
Everything.
I don't want to re-ask you questions that we went
everything
over.
that we talked about is the same. I just added it made it a little visually better to the eye, and I added 2 graphs that are based off of the information that was presented. So there
All
was
right,
no
so
changes.
I don't want
No.
to re-ask you questions
No,
that we cleared on Friday.
There
That's
was
fine.
there's no changes to the presentation at all.
Perfect.
Just more visually cleaned up.
Yeah, and I saw you put some of the descriptions.
Yeah.
That's good. Okay, the variances help, I think,
Yeah.
in evaluating this. So, because I've got my notes, and I just
Okay.
don't want to be looking at 2 columns for no reason, 2 pages for no reason.
And
I think, if I can just comment briefly on the overview, looking at the operating statement, one of the things we want to focus on is where we've been year to year and the trajectory we're on as a system, right? So we look at where we are compared to last year, but then there's also fiscal 17 right there, and it helps us, for comparative purposes, particularly in a couple of these items. First of all, top level net operating revenue, you're projecting a $32 million increase, which is 3% over last year, right? That's what the budget anticipates. Obviously very positive. I think I understand that the salary number very well. Benefits, obviously that's a 8% improvement over last year. Tremendous improvement, $11.4 million. The physician fees, I noticed that for fiscal 17, they were actually higher than they're projected to be this year. So 2018 seemed to be somewhat of an aberration. So we were at 65.7 for 17. It dropped down to 57.6 for whatever reason last year, and it's going up to 62.2 this year. So we're still less than we were fiscal 17, even though it reflects an 8% increase over fiscal 18 for this current year. And of course, one of the most important items on line item 16 is net tax revenue. We're projecting a $9.5 million decrease, which is 6.9% over last year. So if you look at the trajectory on a lot of these numbers, it's fantastic. And I think that, to me, this budget looks, again, we're obviously just getting into it, but at a high level, a lot of positive developments.
Yeah, and that okay. Do you guys have any other questions on the operating statement? There's one other thing that I want to just point out. To your point, Commissioner Klein, that what we're proposing, the $10 million tax reduction. Once again, we'll talk about it more in the tax hearing. For a resident of Broward County that has a house of $200,000 That's going to be a $32.50 reduction to their tax rate, or a 13% reduction to the Broward Health portion of their millage. On a house at $600,000, it's the same thing. It's going to be a 13% decrease, and it's a $97 reduction to the taxpayers, as well as, in my honest opinion, we're providing better access to care and a better quality product to the community, which is something that we're all very proud of, and we all, as a team, work very hard to accomplish year over year. As you guys know, we have, and this isn't a bad thing against legal, we've had some significant legal expenses, significant compliance enhancements year over year. And I think it's commendable to the team as a whole that we've been able to save money to reduce the tax millage rate. And I think it just shows that we're moving in the right direction. We have a very detailed strategic plan that we're looking forward to on a shade session to go over with you guys, and we look forward to your input. I know it's hard to, these numbers are here, but it's hard to put it all together without the strategic plan and where we see the organization moving in the future. And so I just wanted to thank you for your patience with us and where we're moving, and we're excited for this year, and we're excited for the years to come.
I have two items I want to talk about. One, line 7, insurance. What is the value of sovereign immunity to us on that line item? Do you have any idea?
So I would have to look at what, like, a tenant, I would have to figure out how much their sovereign immunity, by us not having to pay for malpractice insurance cost us. I know that from a sovereign immunity perspective, we have a layer that we're paying, over a couple $1,000,000 to just protect us on the high end. So I would assume it's got to be worth $15 to $20 million on if we self-insure. So it just depends on the claim. If you have a claim, you don't have a claim. If you self-insure, that's kind of a hard question to answer.
But it's one you should look at. A lot of the taxing districts continue to get taxed even when they don't need it, purely for that sovereign immunity issue. There's 34 taxing districts in the state, and some of them that don't need the money continue to take a little bit just so they get that. And knowing the value of that lets you know what your operating really should be. The second issue is on the taxing. On the millage. We see the savings of 9.5, right? Potential after the meeting today.
Yeah.
But we didn't leave the millage rate at the same amount when property values went up. What is that savings? We reduced it in order to accommodate. So 9.5 is actually what we're giving back from the base. But there's also
10.48
on top of it.
So you're saying if we went from 1.2483 to the rollback?
Yeah, so we did the rollback to hold back growth from the 3% property value, whatever property values went up. So there's an automatic amount of money that we are not taking, that if we didn't touch the millage rate, we would have gotten more revenue. What is that? What is that amount of money? Because to me, that is what you've done is you essentially reduced the millage. There's a value to it, especially with the growth. I mean, property values have grown a little crazy. So again,
so if we were just to go to the rollback rate, it would be a 10.48% savings of about $78. Us going more lower than that is additional $19.16 of savings per year. So it's about 10% savings by going.
Yeah, but total value, like $10 million. What is the dollar value of that savings?
What is it? It's $10 million. If we were to stay at the
so it'd be 19.
19 total.
Yeah, it would be 19 total.
Okay.
If we were to keep it the current
in
rate.
terms of also those of you that weren't on the board for the last several years and didn't necessarily pay attention to what this organization took in terms of tax dollars, I could be wrong in the exact number, but I believe it was north of $160 million that this organization took in tax support when I got on this board, which was less than 3 years ago. So in terms of trends, the trend is substantially in the right direction.
So if you
even
go to
more
slide
so
13,
than what you see here.
if you go to slide 13, there's I put together a graphical slide for you guys to show you all the way from 08 to where we are proposing there. So it's a nice visual slide. If you look, when you got here, 15,
What page did you say it was? I'm sorry.
slide 13,
13.
and then the backup is in front of it, is behind that.
That's a nice trend.
Yeah, so if you look, and I think we had a little bump up. We went into a little snag in 16 to 17, and then if you look, it's going down. So over, if you look, I looked at our South District, our partners. I think that they're something that we eventually want to get to. I don't think we're there, but if you look at their reduction year over year, this is their curve. They started slowly, and then each year they continue to reduce, and that's kind of what our strategic plan is really focused around, is continue to reduce. I was talking to the team earlier. It's phenomenal to give back to the taxpayers. I think that they've supported us for a long time, but what I think the biggest advantage of continuing to reduce the taxpayers' subsidy is that it changes the culture of the organization. They know that if they're going to spend $100,000 on redoing a lobby, that $100,000 is going to take away from them being able to provide quality care and access to care, which is our mission. It allows them to think through processes better and think through strategic initiatives and how we're spending our money, because they know that there's not an ATM machine or there's not a money tree that's going to just continue to feed what they want to do. And that's, Gino and I and Bev and a lot of our leaderships have come from more of the profit world, and that's really that's the feel of the profit. You earn your EBITDA and your net operating income to be able to fund your capital for the next year. So every dollar you get, every expense that you spend needs to be almost like your own. And I think that continually, the pressure that the Board of Commissioners puts on to continue to hold us accountable to reduce the millage rate in future years over a gradual time, not all at once, is just a great strategy on your part, and it allows for you guys to help us to change the strategic mindset of the employees and the leaders of the organization.
I think that's a good. I would say I've spent a great deal of my career in the insurance industry, and I would look at this maybe a little bit more like a mutual company versus a stock company, right? The understanding of who our constituents are, to me, is paramount. And you don't necessarily have to run this organization as a for-profit organization, but as a mutual company, you're running it for the benefit of your constituents. And there's a great deal of people in this community that rely heavily on this system. And that responsibility that we have as those that are perhaps more fortunate is something I think we can't lose sight of. And in a for-profit world, if you will, in a stock company world, that can happen. So thinking more in the terms of a mutual company would be, I think, the next step. So, anyway, very good.
I want to just work backwards now, I guess, because we've...
Alan, just one final question on slide 3. You were referencing earlier, we were discussing line item 5, which is fees, other, and then you briefly mentioned compliance, legal costs. Would those outside legal and compliance costs fall into that category? Is that where that would be captured?
So, no. Some of it, legal fees are her attorneys that are our in-house attorneys, are in salary and wages.
Right.
And then I think in the HR meeting, the board reports, we have a budget. I think it's on the agenda to go over their budgets in more detail. And then the fees other, which is compliance and kind of the consultants and some of the outside legal fees, are in that line item. I will have to say though that the legal fees year over year, they've actually come down a tad. So that budget was thought out. I think that there's some expenses that are just out of the control of the general counsel. I think that we get sued, she has to defend us to the grave, right? So the legal fees over a 4-year period have really generally stayed pretty much flat year over year, and that's how the legal fees have been constructed. They did their own budgets. They're all reports to you. I think they did a really good job of being strategic and thoughtful and not over the top, but provided a budget that they were going to be able to have constraints.
Are we going over the direct reports budgets like legal?
I think it's on the agenda, right?
Which agenda is it on?
Direct reports or?
Isn't it on the HR agenda?
I think we only have one budget on it. That was one of our. It's only one is
I thought
It should be compliant.
It's a board resources budget. So
that's different. I think we're gonna deal with the only budget that I received was the audit.
Oh, okay, because
Audit department budget and staffing.
So approving this budget would approve legal, compliance, and internal audit.
and operations.
But we don't, it's not extracted from here. So we're not, the board is responsible for all four of those parts, but we're not looking at that budget. I thought we were looking at it in HR. I thought we were looking at
I have those. We have them printed out. If you got, I thought that the HR agenda that said board resources budget, I thought that was.
No, that's really going to deal with a different issue. But the only budget that I received was the budget from the internal audit, and it had to do with their budget and salary staffing.
I have a copy of the legal budget.
I have copies because I had them for the HR. I have copies. Let me get them for you.
Okay, so yeah, well, I don't know if do we want to cover that right now?
I think we need to cover either this meeting or the next. The next meeting's only a few weeks away, so I'm okay with being better prepared by the next meeting, but we're approving this budget today, and this budget does contain those budgets, which we can approve it contingent on us also approving those individual budgets, but I do think the board needs to take more responsibility for our direct reports budgets, or at least understanding of what's in them.
Yeah, I'd like to see it on.
Commissioner Berry, to your point, the second tax hearing is the final budget.
Okay.
So you have an opportunity.
To do
So
that. Okay.
I sat down with Nancy as head of legal and went over the budget. We're ready to whenever you want to, but this is a proposed budget today.
Okay.
Final budget on
So
the 26th.
we are not final. We're not doing a final approval today.
No.
Good.
This
Just
is
proposed.
as you recall we were supposed to do this at the August meeting, but we didn't have a quorum.
But
So
you understand we all have these one-on-ones, but we don't get to speak to each other
Right.
until today.
yeah,
And I saw some issues in internal audit that I want to speak to the board about. I want to speak to my colleagues about because I don't think we have an adequate budget to do what that group is charged with doing. I'm not sure about legal. I've seen it, and there's some things on it I don't understand, but we're going to look at that. Compliance, I think, looks okay to me, but I also think the rest of the board needs to look at it, talk about it, and understand what they're doing. Internal audit's scope is huge. And if you read our charter, internal audit is mentioned just as much as the CEO is for the board to be responsible for. I think we need to understand these budgets, what they're trying to accomplish, and whether or not we're sufficiently staffing and funding those groups.
No, I can share that.
Or we could also be overstaffing them. I don't know, but I just want to make sure that we understand what we're responsible for, and that means understanding their budgets, the line of authority, and all those things. That's what I was kind of hoping we would do in HR.
Yeah.
Maybe we'll do it at the next HR meeting.
Well, we had to unfortunately cancel an audit committee meeting last month that I would have liked to have addressed those issues as well, because I haven't had an opportunity to review an internal audit budget, or sit down with our internal auditor.
So to that your comments, Commissioner Berry, was I had a briefing with Nigel, internal audit, and he walked me through. I asked him to come to HR today to present his budget and talk about his staffing needs as well as spacing issues. And I also had a conversation with Alan Goldsmith regarding the budgets, and what Alan had indicated to me is that he was taking the budgets as they were presented for board reports on the assumption that we were sitting down with those board reports and reviewing their budgets, and he wasn't going to increase or decrease a board report budget, that it was really our purview to work with them. So I thought that the only budget that I've seen that we're going to present in HR, and I would be happy to have the rest of them as well talk about it, because I think it's important. It's the only one that I saw was Nigel's. So I'm open to discussing it. I just don't know if we're going to have the time. This was such a time
Like I
constraint
said,
today.
as long as if we're going to finally approve the overall budget, these are inside of that budget, and we need to look at them before we do that, because I do think they're important. You saw the same thing I saw with Nigel then, and you understand that the scope is huge.
Yep.
And do they have the right? And this is not making a judgment on that. Does he have the right people to get that done? There are things that I've been in healthcare for close to 35 years now, and I couldn't do half the things I saw in there. So I don't know who he has that does them, and the internal audit function is critical. absolutely critical to us. One, getting out of the CIA and functioning the way we need to. Compliance is critical. I see FTEs. Doesn't really mean I know what the skill set of that staff is. So I do want to do a deeper dive, and I do believe it's appropriate for your committee. And as long as we're not final approving this budget, I'm okay waiting. I just want to do it before we approve the budget in a final form.
Yeah, and I think we'll need to, well, I don't think, I know we'll need to figure out an audit committee meeting before the next tax hearing, because, you know, we've got, well, at least one, I don't know where we stand on the other person, but a new independent member, and the audit committee, of course, has got, needs to have a fair amount of input, you know, on that as well.
So it appears we don't have a lot of time between now and that tax hearing. So the question becomes is, can we, you know, how do we get all of these budgets reviewed in time for the next hearing? So maybe we should think about what we need to do here. At what point do we want to try to review these budgets? I mean, I've got one, we're going to take care of audit today, or at least as much as we can, but there's three other that I don't know if we have any questions, because I haven't talked to Commissioner Gregoire, because we haven't seen each other about if legal's got what they want. Commissioner Uri obviously was trying to schedule an audit committee, so hasn't, you know, we can deal with audit today. But then there's, you know, compliance. You know, I don't know if there's resources, so I guess maybe we should think about when we want to try to review these budgets.
So one of my questions was during this, I believe the legal budget review should be in a shade session, but that's something we need to talk to Lynn about. We are authorizing, if you look, there's 20, 30, a lot of these are outside of her control, out of legal's control. There are 51 different line items on here. I don't think anybody on this group can tell me, except for maybe you, Commissioner Gregoire, what each of those things is doing, what they're buying. Does this board have we have the authority with compliance, we have the authority with Ms. Capasso's budget, and with internal audit to make changes and reductions that we want. We understand what they're doing. I don't know that we all completely understand the legal portion, and I think there's some strategies there that legal's pursuing in the way of some of the litigation. I don't think should be discussed publicly. I believe the board needs to understand what we're doing with this legal budget, what's happening. I appreciate the fact that the budget has come down, but when you look at some of this stuff, FTI consulting, that's, I think, out of her control. There's a bunch of stuff here that appear to be standard operating costs that look like they're outside consulting or outside legal firms. You know, Florida Bar, there's probably 20 items in here just from a quick glance that you probably have no control over.
So the FTI and the PYA are for the fair market value report.
Yeah.
So those are in the control of the facilities. They determine what they want to pay for, what they have to pay for. We've talked about with Alan and Gino in the future that perhaps shifting them over to the facilities, because they actually, it might have a little bit of a benefit if they're actually responsible for having multiple reports for the same service. And so the other firms do a whole host of different things. You can't go into the shade to discuss a budget.
I want to discuss what each of these firms is doing. If there's one that's in litigation that you have a strategy for, I can't imagine we have to do that in public.
So you can call a shade session for litigation purposes, only to discuss, to advise me and outside counsel, if appropriate, on any questions I have regarding litigation expenditures or strategic settlements.
Questions you have.
Questions I have.
So the board has no authority. The board has no authority to go in the shade to talk about a potential litigation matter. Is what you're saying. So if we think,
so
I don't pick any of these.
You can't go in the shade for an update. It has to be that I'm seeking advice on a particular matter that's currently pending involving the district.
But where does that come from?
The statute.
From what? Not the charter.
The Florida statutes on litigation.
And it says that.
Where does strategy fit in then too? Because I think
that's what I want to know is strategies.
It's individualized or in public. So unless you're talking about a case or cases, it's very proscribed in Florida statutes 286. and it says that I can call a shade meeting to obtain guidance and advice that I need for litigation expenditures or settlement strategy.
But let's take the legal out. I'm talking strategy.
Okay.
We can't possibly not be able to go into a shade session to discuss strategy. Like, management team is interested in acquiring some
Right.
facility. Okay,
So
that's
in-
not necessarily something you're
Correct.
going to broadcast
It's a
publicly.
different statutory section. It's 395-3035, and it prescribes what you can go into for strategy planning. Strategic planning is described by statute. There are roughly 8 categories. They include things like materially expanding an existing service, adding a new service, acquiring another facility by lease or purchase. They are not day-to-day. You cannot be discussing current operations in that type of strategy, unless a minor part of the strategy is discussing current operations as they relate to expanding a new service. So they're defined by statute. So to go into a shade to say, what is your strategy for legal expenses, is not one of the items that you're allowed to do by statute. So it would be individual briefings or public discussion.
So then let's do it in public.
Okay.
If we can't do it, then let's start at the top of these and go through each firm, what they're doing, and maybe not today, but unless the rest of the board wants to. I think it's easy to do the other two.
Okay, thank you.
I think it's really difficult to do this one without getting ourselves into a pinch, and that's why I would request a shade. But if we can't do it, we can't do it. Does the rest of the board know? Do you know what all of these
Nancy and I
firms are doing?
discussed a lot of these.
We frequently discuss
Okay.
what's on that sheet.
So-
But let me ask you, Commissioner Berry, is your purpose to decrease the legal budget? Because I asked each one of these people if they believed that they had adequately budgeted for their ideal situation, and each told me yes.
So mine is, it's partially that, but I also believe that the board has more authority than the folks that work for us believe we do. I think the board has the right to push a settlement. We disagree, but I think we do have the right to push a settlement or to look at something and say, we want this case to go away. What's it going to take? What's our strategy to if I don't even know which ones cover which matters we have in front. I couldn't tell you what we're being sued for or not. I don't know which one of these is defensive and which one isn't. Are we pursuing anybody? I believe the board has some, not just authority, I think they have the responsibility to make sure that we're reducing expenses and putting some of these issues behind us. I would like as many of these, it seems excessive to see 51 line items for different firms on this. We're a big organization, that might not be excessive, but I don't know, and I can't sit down with you and meet and talk about it.
I know.
So just to clarify, there are not 51 items that are law firms.
Well,
More
that's
than-
what I said, yeah.
Well, more than half of them are not law firms.
Okay.
They're subscriptions, they are American Health lawyers' fees, outside subscriptions, et cetera. So there are probably 20 to 22 that are actually law firms. Realty Trust. So the first ones that you see at the top 5 are all for fair market value. So Realty Trust Group does our fair market value for our leases, the MOBs that we own.
So that's close to $1 million right there, right? So there's $1 million off your 6.1. So when I'm asked by the press or anybody else how much you're spending in legal fees, my quote today is 6.1 million.
Right, and that's not accurate.
Well, yeah, it's not accurate because I don't know.
Right, so
And-
if you want to do it now, or I can give you what are the firms versus what are the other
Okay.
expenses.
It might be
I
helpful.
think that makes sense.
But it might also be helpful if we break this budget, these 51 line items out
Right,
in the next meeting, and just basically lay out services,
Yep.
which are fair market value, which we have to spend in order to facilitate all of our contracting. So break that out of a separate category and take it out of legal and make it, so it breaks out. What's
Absolutely.
that? What is litigation?
Yep.
What is subscriptions, and what are fees? And it
Right.
might clean this up. So
Right.
instead of looking at a $6.1 million budget, we may be looking something significantly less but we may be spending more in areas that we're not realizing that we're spending as much on fair market value. And that may be a better way to break this budget out.
And 35 to 51, none of those are, you just have to look at 6 to 34 are the outside legal expenses, and some of the firms we don't use anymore, but they hit the budget when they hit the budget. So if you want to know about law firms, it's 6 through 34. Fair market value is 1 through 5, and other things like, you know, $416 for books, or $1,200 for American Health Lawyers. So 35 to 51 are just other.
So 28 firms.
Yep.
28 firms. How many of those are to defend us against litigation of one sort or another?
One.
Some of these are really low
Okay,
dollars, so I
5,
assume they're
7,
opinions.
5. Oh, and 27 is not a law firm either. About 7, 8. And we're talking about, when you say litigation, I'm also including regulatory suits we have with ACA on undocumented aliens. That would be like the Dwayne Morris. Bradley Arendt, we got, as you know, a CID, civil investigative demand, a while ago. So it's not just litigation, it's
So
also
can you
regulatory.
talk about that one?
The
Because
CID?
the Bradley Aaron.
So Bradley Arendt has started out advising, doing general health care advice. And the first question was actually about our managed care contract in an antitrust context. We've also used them most recently for defending, guiding us, if you will, on a civil investigative demand that was served on us by the federal government, where they wanted a significant amount of production and answers to questions regarding a lawsuit that was brought by the former chair of this board, David DiPietro. As you may have read, the government declined to intervene, but we had to expend quite a lot of time and resources to provide the government what they needed to answer questions. So they are, in addition, because they have done the 21st century issue, they are now working with us and Gino on opportunities for improvement, if any, on that contract.
At $500,000 a year.
No, that's not just that. So the CID was quite a lot of money.
Well, this firm, I
Right.
understand. The whole
Right.
This firm is $500,000 a year to do all the things you just said.
Well, this is a projection for next year, right, for the current fiscal year, correct?
Yeah, it's
Yes.
requested.
Yep.
So that's the spend is for those things.
And contractual work, correct, and
So-
healthcare.
Is there anything we control in there that we could do in-house instead of out?
No.
Okay. That's it. So that one is take it as it comes, but it sounds like a lot of those issues are sort of settled. They're not?
The CID is settled, and now we're working to restructure based on a lot of information that they were able to cull through, emails. They had to review everything.
Yeah, but
Went to the
it's got
government.
nothing to do with them anymore.
Well,
You got
it is, because what I'm saying is now, because they did all of this work and they know this arrangement very well, we're now using it to help us restructure the arrangement. They identified opportunities for improvement.
We have
So-
to redo the whole. There's three or four agreements if you include the lease. There's 3 or 4 agreements with 21st Century, and we're going to have to redo all of them. So that's what I know about in 19.
Correct.
Are there potential savings that may
Yes.
come out of the? Because that's
Yes.
also
Because new fair
something.
market value will also be done. And we did speak to the monitor last year to say we weren't getting then current fair market value because we suspected we would like to restructure it. So we anticipate savings, I would say, Gino. We hope so.
I do think there's a lot of detail that needs to come out of this, because publicly people think that this, and I'm going to go off script a little bit here, because publicly people think this is a slush fund and that it's got no purpose. And I'm fine doing it in the sunshine, but I know there's going to be issues where we talk about litigation that we won't be able to talk about, and I don't want to put us in a bad position there, but I think we need to get the mystery out of this.
Okay.
And figure out how to let everybody know what it is. We're a public facility. Everything we do needs to be in the sunshine. Understanding there are some strategic things we're probably using these firms for that we don't want to really disclose. And maybe we can do all of this in the public at Nancy's next meeting.
Or maybe Ms. Barrett could provide us with written explanations of the things that she can provide us with, and then you can ask
That's
questions based on those written explanations.
That's fine. And also,
I like
to clarify, you can absolutely go into a shade session to discuss settlement strategy. You can absolutely do that.
But I don't even know which
That's
one
why
you would
I
ask.
could,
So
update
maybe
you.
after that, maybe
Yeah.
after a written explanation of what
You
each of
can
these are.
absolutely do that.
And I do think you need to separate these in the way of taking some of these top ones, maybe creating two legal. What's for litigation and what's
The
I think
litigation
if
is
you
really,
just look at this more like a P&L as
Yeah.
opposed to
Yeah.
here's my budget for this law firm, that law firm, and so on.
right, so what if I,
Because an individual law firm,
Mhm.
you know,
they do everything.
not to pick on
They
one,
could.
but obviously there's one that's large.
Mhm.
They may be doing 5 different
Exactly.
things. One might very well be a litigation support. One might very well be some type of
Exactly.
regulatory. I think if you look at this more of a P&L as
Okay.
opposed to here's, you know, our budget for this law firm, it's a little like opaque. to say
right,
the
so
least.
when I presented the last time on the categories of what we're spending, I can remember I gave the pie charts because the law firm, to your point, Commissioner, what do you know if X person is doing Y? I can tie them to the pie charts that I did to say, these are the firms that are doing healthcare, and again, some firms are doing a lot of things. So I can do that.
But let me be clear. I don't believe anything sinister is going on that some
Mhm.
folks out in the community believe, and I want to expose it to the community. People can look at it, dice it, slice it, research it. There's nothing, from my perspective at this point, to hide here.
Nope.
And I think Commissioner Gregoire's point is good. Maybe something in writing that says here's what they are. And if there's something that it's a piece of litigation that I think we should try to get out of, then I'll ask for a shade session for that specific one.
Okay.
But I do want to know what this is. It's easy to say, I know you need 2 more attorneys, and that's on this request too. But it doesn't. You have 9, 10. You're going to have 13 for 2019.
Wait, 13 in-house?
That's
No,
what this says.
I have 6 attorneys.
13 FD. Sorry.
FTE,
Yeah,
that
13
includes
FTE.
secretaries,
Yeah,
right,
yeah.
okay.
So understanding that and understanding that structure, does anybody on the board understand the structure of any of the departments that we're responsible for? Do you know what, Nigel? Do you know the structure of his office? I mean, you probably do, Commissioner Uri. Commissioner Gregoire should know that legal. What I'd like to get to the point of is where the commissioners that are responsible for those areas come back and say, here's our budget with that person, and understand exactly what it is and explain it to us.
Well,
Because
that's
it's a lot to do here.
That was obviously what, in part, audit committee was
Yeah.
hopefully going to have done last
And
a few weeks ago. You know, I'm at least of the we're only 5 people. I'm not opposed to discussing this whenever it is we can get together and whatever committee it is. I really don't care. Okay, but to some extent, your point is well taken. There is a responsibility for each individual committee underneath, that this reporting structure might more logically fall underneath. While yes, I care somewhat less about which committee it is we discuss it, as long as we discuss it. Where audit maybe is a little different, is we do have, well, 1, hopefully 2 independent outside folks that need to also weigh in on these things, especially as it relates to internal audit. So I think that might be the only arguably different one.
And as far as the structure of the department, I think Ms. Barrett gave us that structure maybe 2 meetings ago. So we knew how many people she had, what each person was responsible for, except for the support staff.
And what I might recommend is this time next year, hopefully, the number of issues that we're dealing with will be less. And I think what might be helpful is audit, legal, compliance, sit down, come up with their budget in the middle of the summer, and then maybe we have a a board report budget session where we review the budgets, where we can ask internal audit, compliance, legal to present their budget to us as a board. We approve the budget, and then it goes to the CFO's office and gets included and uploaded into the 2020 fiscal year budget. And I don't think it happened this year. We have too many other issues. We need to get some of these things resolved. I think that's a process that we ought to review. And I don't know if it's reviewed in governance as some of the other issues that we maybe just setting a process for the board of how we want to operate going forward. And I think as we get 5 people on this board, hopefully this time next year we have 7 people on this board, and we have additional individuals who can help us kind of work through this. And then we approve these budgets in a session by itself, present it to the finance department, and let the CFO upload it into his proposal for 2020. And then, I think that's a better way to proceed going forward. But I think we got to do what we got to do this year, because we've got to approve this budget next week, in 2 weeks, correct?
Yeah.
2 weeks.
26.
Yeah. So I think that would be something we ought to consider as part of what this board's role will be going forward. Build some process to what we're doing.
I absolutely agree, and I think as we go along, we're constantly fixing problems that we uncover from past practices. And I think the staff are finding that at the staff and operational level, at the board level, we're finding them. Seems like every meeting. And I think Commissioner Wellens, your point is well taken. We need to decide how we're going to be approaching these items and how we can get to a more efficient place where we all have more knowledge and we're gaining efficiencies through what the board is doing and making us a more effective board, particularly in terms of oversight. And towards that end, I'm very glad that we now have these budgets from our direct reports. They do raise questions that I think we do need to have answered. So just high level, if we look at the legal budget, there's been a roughly 50% increase since fiscal year 16. In terms of salaries, the overall cost seems to have been relatively flat. But being an attorney myself, I have a lot of questions about how we are structuring this and whether we're gaining the most efficiencies. And when I look at a chart that has 27 law firms on it, and 7 or 8 of those are handling litigation, from what I understand, from what I was just told,
Or
we still have
regulatory.
7 or 8 are litigation or regulatory.
Correct.
So that leaves another 20 firms or so that are doing something other, and 13 of those firms are over $100,000. So we're spending a lot of money with a lot of different firms. Some of the numbers are obviously fairly high, and again, these are projections. So I'd like to know kind of what we spent last year on some of these same firms and why we're projecting the numbers going forward. If it is based on what we spent last year, obviously it must be to some extent, and why we think the going forward numbers are a reasonable estimation. What I'd like to do is just at a high level, since we need to make some progress on this, and we have a short window over the next 2 weeks, I'd like to just go through the top firms on here and just get a high level sense as to what they're doing. So the firms that are over $100,000 in anticipated charges for fiscal 19, generally high level, what are they doing for us? Like starting with Bradley Arendt at $502,000. Just went over that one.
I just went over that
CID.
one. And also the FY16 was when we got our CIA. So that was the change where we had to, that was when we entered into our CIA. So if you see a shift between 15 and 16. So Bruce Lyons is an attorney who represents Commissioner Rodriguez. Buchanan Ingersoll, they just do general advisory public entity work for the district. Colson represents
What does that mean?
Public entity, and anything we have questions about board process. They do our 119s that are particularly long. So for example, Eugene Pettis provided us with a 119 request, a law firm that had 64 categories of issues, not individual requests. So they have to be reviewed, emails, 8,000 emails in one request. They do a lot of our public records that where the requester is a law firm. Former Commissioner David DiPietro gave us a public records request that has already taken us probably about 25 to 30 hours just to gather the materials and find out. A law firm representing someone who was suing us also gave us a 4-page public records request. So they worked with the outside law firm to go through what could be exempt, privilege, and to try to narrow the scope. Colson Hicks represents me in the civil. Epstein Becker is the Rich Wessling, who was the person who investigated the Pauline Grant anti-kickback issue, and he helps us on some of our external investigations that involve potential kickback. Phillips, so Foley and Lardner is our counsel for the CIA, as well as for Stark Analyses. Don Romano is an attorney who wrote the Stark regulations. So when we have our Stark self-disclosures, which we have had 2 that we reported, we have 2 more coming down the pike. They would help us write those. And then Heidi Sorensen, who worked with our current monitor, provides us with guidance and reviews our report before it goes to Laura Ellis. Cobry and Kim, that will come down. They were doing some regulatory work for us. Lou Fishman is, that is also just a guest number. He does medical staff issues. Now that Amy Galloway is not, that we've taken a lot of the medical staff, which was done by Amy Galloway on behalf of the doctors, we've taken that all in-house. So he's for the unusual request. Lair, Levy, and Mendez represents Commissioner Uri. Marcos, PA, we're probably not going to use him anymore. We had some regulatory issues that we thought were going to come to fruition. We're not sure if they are. Pillsbury represents President Capasso. Podhurst, we thought we were going to have some litigation. We think it's gone away, not sure. Schutz and Bowen represents former Commissioner Linda Robeson. Tate Bronis works with us on our state attorney. We get a lot of state attorney requests. So, for example, subpoenas. When the Parkland shooter ended up at our hospital and his brother, we had a lot of interaction with the state attorney's office. She would help us with that. The Thomas Health Log, that's only 20, and that was it. Do you have any questions or anything you want me to expand on?
Okay, when this, I guess they're not civil cases, the cases where we're representing commissioners.
The civil.
Right, the civil
Pauline
cases.
Grant.
When and if those get settled this year, let's assume we settle those by the end of this fiscal year 19, how much will our legal budget come down when we don't have to have the representation for all the current and former commissioners?
Right, so at the worst case scenario, I don't do math, but by the sum of those firms where I've said represent Bev Capasso, represent me, those will all be gone.
I mean, that's a significant
It is.
portion of your budget.
It is, and that
could
was
be
to
20, 25% of your budget.
Right, and that was Alan's point, that certain of the legal fees, we got sued individually, which means that if Pauline Grant, and we got 3 lawsuits where Pauline Grant has sued us, 3. So if they hadn't named Bev Capasso individually, me individually, then we would have had one law firm which represents the district, which is also Foley. And the lead on these cases are Foley.
Who's representing Broward Health
Foley.
in that case?
That's what I was referring to. Right.
So can I call a shade session on that case in particular?
Sure.
Strategy. I'd like to do that.
If you want to discuss litigation, there's only 2 topics that can be discussed: litigation expenditures or settlement strategies. I call it because I need guidance from the board on what your current thinking is on those 2. Then I'd like to request a shade session under 286, I think it's 011, but I'm not sure, in order to discuss the pending case of Grant versus the North Broward Hospital District et al., which would be individually Bev Capasso, Lynn Barrett, Linda Robeson, Christopher Uri, and Rocky Rodriguez, in order to discuss litigation expenditures and or settlement strategy at the earliest possible date.
Do we need
You need a motion.
Okay, so moved.
I'll second it.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed?
So then we would just work with your schedules. Patty would work. Typically, what we do is we have a shade session after a public meeting, for example. So you would either have to do, if you want to do it on a separate day, we have a public meeting, we open it up to the public, get comments, close it to the shade. Everybody, the only people by statute that are allowed are the commissioners, myself, Ms. Capasso, and outside counsel.
Does it have to be can it be a public meeting after a committee meeting, or does it have to be?
No, because committee don't take action, so it has to be either a regular board meeting that we recess into the shade, or it is a special meeting where we recess into the shade.
Okay, so we could call a special board meeting, because
Yes.
there's probably a couple of topics where we could address that probably we can't address between now and September 26th, but maybe shortly thereafter. We could have a special and then have a shade after that.
Yes, you can.
Okay. I just want to point out, I just did a quick calculation, and I calculated about $1.2 million for representation of commissioners and the president CEO. So that's 20% of your budget at a minimum. So I think that your budget should be coming down significantly
Correct.
when this issues get resolved, and they're eventually going to get resolved.
Correct.
We can't control how quickly they get resolved in Broward County, but I think they're going to get resolved. So I would suspect that the fiscal year 2020 budget should look significantly
Right.
different.
And to Commissioner Klein's point, and I know Commissioner Uri expressed, when are we going to stop finding things? Unfortunately, we keep finding things. Not in a bad way, but
No,
sort of.
I want to find things.
Right, so we do
want
wanna
the
find
kitchen
things.
sink. I want a mark. I want a
completely
line
agree.
drawn
Done.
that's crystal
Right.
freaking clear.
Unfortunately,
that
it's been a
this
lot of
is
years.
Old. This is new.
Right.
And that has been an ongoing issue. And it's unfortunate. This is a very complex
I
organization.
think you're right.
I totally get it. But one of the things that I would say, though, and this is for the benefit of some of those that have been here, and I can't believe I'm the oldest person on that, the oldest,
Second oldest, and I'm
I think you're the
longest tenured. Let's put it that way. It's unbelievable to me. But I think part of what I'm hearing, okay, Ms. Barrett, is that the effort that this organization took prior to even me coming on to bring the general counsel's office in-house. Okay, you obviously have staffing needs that have not been filled yet. To the extent we can replace outside legal expenses with internal resources is a substantial savings. We just went through this with operationally as it relates to contract employees, overtime, and a variety of other things. I would encourage you to address, and I don't doubt that you're trying to, okay, but I would encourage you to put some further effort into bringing people in-house so that we are reducing substantially the hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of dollars, if not, God forbid, more an hour folks to do some of the things that I think we hopefully can bring somebody in.
Right, and so we were able to do that with the senior counsel, Christina Guzman. No healthcare really, but a litigator. So as she's learning, we're able to take in more of the, so I had mentioned at the legal meeting in the pie charts that we are also taking action as we are required to do with certain physicians or groups when we have to evict, which we had not done in the past, where we have to recoup money. And so Christina is heading up all of that, and she's currently partnering with counsel because it's new, but hopefully as she gets more on the healthcare side, one of the goals in hiring her was to eliminate, so if you'll see Johnson and Anselmo, I think that was about $150,000 or so last year. It's still not going to replace the big litigation where you need a litigator full time, but that was a strategic hire that we did have.
There really is close to, just by some rough calculations in my head, $3 to $4 million that you're spending that's really out of your control. The CIA, some of those other things, it's within your control to choose who does it, but it's not in your control to spend it, because you're going to have to spend that money. I know these firms none of them are cheap. and especially if you want really good quality folks. But this is a step in the right direction, because I do believe there's a myth out there that this is all just for naught.
Right.
It's not. And if people understand what is being done, the expenses look outrageous. But listen, my company sues and gets sued, and it costs us a lot of money. It's not cheap. So the more we can get some of this off our books, the better off we are. But this does not appear to be just frivolous expenditures. It appears to me that there's some justifications, and as long as we understand those, I think we're in better shape.
Yeah, and just two
great.
final points I wanted to make. I mean, one, being an outside counsel, I understand, you deal with different clients. Some clients have more internal resources than others. And the less internal resources they have, the more you have to do as outside counsel. That means more hours, and that means more expense. So there's always a balance in structuring a corporate legal department in how many internal resources you have and how much you need to rely on outside. So to the extent we can become more efficient, and we are adding FTEs. I don't know what numbers of those are attorneys or non-attorneys, but certainly adding, there's an efficiency that can be gained by doing that. So I think that certainly, I appreciate you looking at that and focusing on that. And when it comes to even 119 requests and gathering responsive materials, that's something we can hopefully internalize more, because again, even if it's a non-attorney at the outside, it's a paralegal and they're charging a couple $100
That's
an hour.
exactly right. And one of the requests we have is for exactly that purpose. So we've been interviewing people that can respond to the subpoenas, the government subpoenas that take an awful lot of time, and exactly to do that, to get and do the first review. And so we've interviewed about 4 paralegals for exactly that purpose.
All right.
That's a great point.
Can we,
All right, perfect. So,
at what point do you want to propose a time to set for the shade session so we can set our calendars?
well, we have a tax hearing scheduled for 5:30 on September 26th. I would propose that the stage session take place after that tax hearing.
Is that good with you?
Yes. No, no. No, I'm flying out that night. Yes.
I also, that evening will be pressed.
Do we have time before? Can we schedule the stage?
Well, I know I'd like to have the audit committee meeting that we had scheduled for August between now and the 26th. I know that audit committee is not the take action special meeting that would be required, but to the extent we can get an audit committee meeting, I would prefer that be all members of the board included. Perhaps that day could also schedule a special meeting following the audit committee, and then do the shade session.
Do we need that before the 26th?
If that's when the budget's going to be
Well,
final.
that's-
No. I'm talking about
the session about the litigation.
So
Well,
I'm going to propose.
I'm only saying it. Sorry, I was
Okay.
only saying it because the audit committee meeting and internal audit discussion is really a big part of that in terms of their budget and so on, right? And so I can't speak, of course, for the independent members, but my hope would be that they would be able to attend or what have you. But I do think that would be helpful to have prior to the 26th, because it is a budget issue.
I think if you could do compliance the same day would be great.
But outside counsel also has to be available.
The same day does that, though.
If you're talking about the shade.
No. I'm
Oh, the
talking
shade
about
is different.
his-
Okay, yeah.
His audit.
I'd like to propose the shade be the week of October 8th. That's about a week and a half after the 26th meeting. I know I'm going to propose that we do at least one, if not 2, additional HR committee meetings. Because some things we're going to have to follow up on. That week might be a good week, because it's a couple of weeks before the next board meeting, and will give us an opportunity. So that's a week that I know that would work. If anybody's available that week, let's try to do it. And if we have to have a special,
Call counsel.
yeah, you call counsel.
Okay.
They'll give you time
No
to set
problem.
counsel, and we're going to need a special meeting anyways for some other items that are probably going to come up. So let's see if we can do it that week. It'd be a good week, because that'll give us 2 weeks between there and the board meeting, which will be sometime around October 31st, around Halloween timeframe. So if there's anything that comes out of those meetings, they'll be ready for the board. It'll give us plenty of time to get the materials and everything ready for board.
I will be at in one of these meetings today asking for an additional shade meeting on strategy, strategic planning going forward. That's all I'll say now. So I've spoken to Lynn about it. She understands what it'll be, so maybe we can do it all on the same day.
It's different
Different
shade
issues.
sessions and different people allowed
that
to
way-
come, but you could do it at the same day for sure.
I'm in agreement. I think we do need to have that shade session that you mentioned, Commissioner Berry. So I guess the question, I mean, your concern was that whether we are or not able to iron out, some of these expenses prior to the budget. These are obviously projections based on litigation. Primarily, it's mostly litigation expense, which is very difficult to predict. So, to me, I think the best we could do is say, based on past experience, from what we're hearing now, there seems to be a reasonable estimate of what our litigation costs and outside counsel costs would be next year. And at that shade session, hopefully we can iron out strategies for dealing with these and perhaps not spend the money that we're projecting be spent. I mean, that's
Right.
the ideal scenario.
Right.
Let's get some of these things wrapped up and save the taxpayer some money.
If the commissioners that are the chairs of each of these three committees tell me they're comfortable, then I'm going to be comfortable. But it's the commissioners that need to look at them and say, yes, this is good. I mean, Commissioner Uri, you know the work that they have to do in internal audit. It's intense. Do they have the right people to do it?
Well, I know they're understaffed.
Yeah, and Commissioner Gregoire, you have this tool.
Compliance and legal are huge.
And they're massive issues. Our compliance department needs to be effective, and we need to catch the issues internally. We need to deal with their stuff. We need to make sure.
And I will address that later. Compliance has a very, very difficult task, but it is not a private detective agency.
I get that.
Everyone has to be responsible for compliance.
It's a huge job.
Yes.
It's a huge responsibility too. So with that, I mean, we're going to have this special meeting on legal. Each of the committees will meet with their folks on this. Do they all meet before the budget is final? Will you meet before budget is final?
We have nothing
discussed it.
scheduled right
So you're
now,
already
but
comfortable?
we meet all the time.
Okay, so you're good with those?
I'm comfortable.
So
Compliance
then-
is meeting today, and audit's going to meet between the 26th. I think we
Perfect.
can iron out these budgets, and we're going to deal with. We're going to get a presentation on audit today, and they're going to meet. So I think that we'll have these budgets ready to go for the 26th for final approval.
And despite the litigation, the budget has gone down for
Yeah.
legal.
Well, no,
So
I see that.
Ms. Barrett's doing everything she
I-
can to
I-
keep it.
I see that. I
Check.
just, this is the only time we get to meet. We all hear different things in the community, and I want to there's nothing to hide here. Let's put it out there and make sure we know what is going on, and that's really what I want to get to. So we can move on to the real business of what we should be doing and providing quality health care to the people of Broward County. With that, Alan,
I'm sorry, Commissioner. Just one other question before we leave this topic of our direct reports budgets. I'm now in receipt of the compliance department budget. It projects roughly a 50% increase from 18 to 19, and it seems to be attributable to FTEs. Is this something that this seems to be not something I've heard about before in terms of this.
Compliance, it's
so-
gone from 42 to 38.
No, so can I talk on this real quick?
Yes.
Nick and I have worked on this, and he's gone over every FTE ad with me, and it makes sense to add the FTEs just from an operational perspective. I think he is adding some very high-level compliance directors that are going to help out through the process. I think he was a little understaffed, so I think that right sizes him and gets him to where he needs to be. So I'm okay. Not that I matter, but I've really worked on the compliance budget with Nick, and he can talk on adding FTEs, and we're okay with it.
I think I'd like to hear who these 7 folks are that we're going to be hiring, like in what areas. But since we're talking budgets here, that's a big increase in the number
but
of people.
didn't we go down?
We went down.
Yeah.
Correct.
We went down by
Budget
And
376,000.
also the only additions to staff that I've made are based on other positions within the company, right? So the compliance department added 3 additional FTEs from the focus arrangements department that was previously under the general counsel's office. So that came under my budget. In addition,
I'm sorry,
we
could
assumed
you repeat that on this then?
so we added 3 additional FTEs when the focus arrangement department that was previously under the general counsel's office became under the compliance department.
Like I
So
said, you
there was a
right-size.
shift from So 3 people left legal and went to compliance because
Yes,
focus arrangements was switched from legal to compliance.
correct.
All right. So,
And then also ethics as well.
so that means if they were adding 3 other people to legal plus another 2 from last year to this year. If we're going from 11 to 13 FTEs,
So that was done before, that was when Kevin Fusco was here. So in the prior budget, we only had, I think, 4 or 5 attorneys. And
No,
then,
he's talking about 2018. So if you look, there's 11 FTEs in 2018.
right,
at 13.
Then it goes to 13 in 2019, but
Right.
you've had 3 that have gone to
right,
compliance.
that
means
happened in,
you're adding 5 between 18 and 19, according to.
well, we lost 3
Right.
attorneys. So
But
we're
you're
just trying to
going up-
replace them.
No, I understand that. But
Okay.
what he's saying is I'm sorry if I'm
No,
putting
no.
words in your
Okay.
mouth, but it goes from 11 to 13.
Okay,
So that means you're adding 2
2, and a
new
paralegal.
FTEs, plus adding 3 people that were previously doing focus arrangements
Right, in
that are no
2016.
longer doing focus
Right,
arrangements.
and that switch came in 2017. They got moved out. Kevin Fusco decided to move them out of legal. So
I'm
we've always
confused,
had
'cause I
either
thought
5 or
that's
6
what he was-
lawyers, and
So-
I'm asking for 2 more.
So in 2017, there were 10.3 FTEs. And that did or did not include the 3 focus arrangement people?
In FY 20.
You're talking legal or you're talking
what are you
compliance?
talking
Because Nick's
about?
standing at
Both.
the podium.
I mean, obviously, we're talking about a shift that happened.
No, I
wanna
think you're
know.
going back. I think there's a confusion as to which numbers we're looking at.
Right.
Ms. Barrett is answering questions about hers, and Nick was answering questions about his staffing.
I know, but they moved staff between departments.
Right, and you combine people into compliance. Ethics went into
And then
compliance.
ethics also
You
went
took
into
over
compliance.
focus
That was another
arrangements.
FTE.
And so when you put the ethics individuals and the lawyers that came over focus arrangement, raised your number by how many? 4.
And that happened in 17?
It happened in fiscal year 17, I think. Because fiscal year 17 or fiscal year 18. So it would have been, it was
think
after I
that-
became interim in 2016. I think it was at the beginning of
Yeah.
calendar year
I
2017.
know what it is. The budget for 13 is wrong.
Yeah, it's
They
not-
double budget me for people. So right now, we have 2 secretaries, 1 paralegal, 6 lawyers, and myself. So the same 2 that were open in 18 are still open. So I think the number, I'm not gonna have 13 people. So I have 2 secretaries, 6 lawyers, so 7 with myself, 7, 8, 9, 10, and I'm asking for 1 paralegal and 2 more lawyers. So 12 at most. So we added a paralegal. The 2 that we carried over were the 2 we lost, we just haven't been able to fill them. So budget 2019 should be 12, not 13.
So that number,
And
FTE,
then-
should be 12?
And then
Yep.
2018 is 10.
10,
Got it.
correct. So there's an extra 1 in there.
So you're at this point trying to hire 2 additional lawyers?
Right, and a paralegal. But we've been trying to hire for over a year. And the last hire was Christina Guzman as a litigator. We were trying to find other senior healthcare people, but it's not exactly a competitive salary for somebody senior. So we changed the classification to a junior.
Mr. Chairman, I would recommend that we pay attention to the timing here. We got a lot of stuff to do,
I'm sorry.
and we have a very limited window to get this done. And it's already 11:30, I think,
Right.
and we've got to do compliance.
Okay.
We've got
So-
HR, we've got
so
a
let's-
board meeting, we've got a tax hearing, and we always tend to get hours behind, and this is why stuff just carries over and over and over.
So let's move this to say each of the chairs of the committees are going to review those budgets and talk to us about them when we do final approval of the budget between now and then.
I think it should be
believe
presented final, but and if anybody has any questions between now and then, put them together and we'll deal with it on the 26th.
No, I appreciate that, but I think we need to iron out at least where we are today, because this was just presented. This should have been presented to us before this. If we look at the compliance, Nick, just real quickly, so you've had 14 people, 13 people, 14 people, now 22 is the projection. So if you gained 3 people from legal, I'm not seeing it.
I gained a total of 4. I'm
you
not
gained a
sure
total
what
of
the
4.
difference is.
So I'm
So
not
I mean,
sure
I gained a total of 4 people.
Okay, so where was that reflected in the budget? You have a copy?
It would have been the employee. It's not in that breakdown. It's not reflected, but it's reflected on another sheet within the budget that shows the employees.
Well, maybe a different.
And I've
question.
also presented to the compliance committee our org chart.
Maybe
I've
a
talked
different
about
question.
staffing.
Hold on, maybe a different question. Since legal's FTEs were overstated, are your FTEs overstated at 22?
I would have to check to make sure, but it does seem high.
All right, so.
But I mean, we have. I would say
You
it's
understand
probably
where
pretty
the
close.
question's coming from,
Yep.
Nick. It's you're going from 14 FTEs in 2018 to 22.
I do, yeah.
So that
I haven't
is
added
not
the staff
accurate, or-
other than the 4 people. So I don't know if that
But this
number
is a-
reflects the
this is
14.
a projection, Nick. It's not where you
No,
stand
but
today.
I'm saying I haven't created any new positions within the compliance department
Okay.
other than the 4 that have come in. So when I
But
came in as
they've already
interim
come in,
compliance officer,
correct?
Yes.
Are they reflected in the 14?
I would have to look and see what was in the last budget. They're reflected in the 20.
The last budget was 13.1.
Yeah. I'm not sure if that counts as if they counted vacant positions at the time or not.
So between now and the next meeting, you have to make your chair comfortable
Sure.
with the numbers to understand them, so that when we come to this next finance meeting, or wherever we're going to approve this, that we understand, have answers to those questions. You know, everyone's going to look at these and look at the FTEs, because it looks like you have an 8-person FTE increase between last year and this year when you just look at this.
Yeah.
You're explaining something different. When you talk about between 17, you went down a 7/10 of an FTE according to this. So make sure we all understand exactly what we're looking at, so that your chair understands, so that they can say, I'm going to trust Commissioner Gregoire that she's going to look at this and say to me, this is good, this works, and the structure works.
Yeah, and I think
that's
you-
where
I think
I
it'd
want
be good for Ms. Barrett to look at what was presented.
Yeah, I don't know. Is there
For
another
you to
page
look
that
at
have
what
the-
was presented here, because if you don't know what it is, it's going to be difficult for me to know what it is.
And the other thing, you
I think it'd be easy to look at, because salaries, unaudited 18 salaries was $1.4 million. We're projecting $2 million. So there's a $600,000 pickup in salaries. So the question would be, is what are those $600,000? Who are they, and where do they come from? Are they not reflected in compliance for 18, but are being carried somewhere else? That adjustment needs to be made. And I would think that Mr. Goldsmith and Mr. Hartsfield could figure that out pretty easily by looking at the org chart, figure out who the 22 individuals are. Because you're not hiring anybody right now, right? Do you have any open positions you're hiring?
Oh, absolutely.
Are they in this 22, or you don't know?
Can I
They're
just
in the
give-
22.
So the unaudited numbers is actual hours. So he had vacant positions, and that's what I explained is he had the right size to fill his vacant positions, which then would have been the 5 positions that are vacant currently, and he added 2 positions. So he has to get his staffing up to where he thinks his staffing should be, and then add the 2 positions.
So the 22 positions in the 600,000 would be if you hired all of the 7 open positions.
Everything was over.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so that clarifies it. That makes more sense. Because if you take the 7 positions, average them by the 600,000
So last year,
pickup in
it
salary.
didn't show, like the number it's showing didn't show the positions that weren't filled.
Right. So you had 5 vacant last year. So you should have been at 19.3.
Right. So the only
from a
position-
comparison standpoint.
Right. Since I've been compliance officer, the only position added to the compliance department have been the 4 that have been transferred in.
That's what I understood this to
Yep.
say, and that's why I was saying I think that's why I was asking the question, because I understood these to include the vacant positions.
Yep.
As
And
the
I- and
audit
I've-
committee
and I've
has
made changes-
vacant positions
Correct.
that they want to hire that are in the budget for 19. So
Right.
the numbers are going to look similar. Like,
And I've made changes to the positions within the compliance department, right? And allocated them differently, which I've talked about in compliance committee meetings, but I haven't added the staff. Right? I've updated job descriptions, changed job duties,
Well, I think where
to meet the needs of what the compliance department needs without adding to staff. Now, I will add to staff if we
Where
have
the
to.
confusion came, at least for me, it was when you said you're only looking to hire 4 people, and it says 8. That's why I was not understanding. That's all.
No, I said we transferred in 4 positions.
they were existing positions, but in legal.
Yeah.
So they really were not
Well, 3
open.
in legal and then 1 in the
And ethics.
department.
They weren't in his budget. We transferred them in there.
That part I understand.
Right,
Yeah.
but he still has open positions.
That's
If I'm,
fine.
I do.
maybe an updated org chart at the next meeting would be helpful.
Sure.
With the current structure and the open positions.
Yep.
And I think it will, then this will be visual
Yep.
and easy to see.
Yeah, and at the next meeting on the agenda is a staffing update, because I wanted to
Okay.
give the compliance
Perfect.
committee an update on where we're at with
Okay.
posting some of the positions and where we're at in the hiring process.
And
for some.
listen, what I want to hear from you, Mr. Crooks and Ms. Barrett, is you went through your committee. You have what it takes to do the job for next year. That budget. I don't want to hear anything 6 months from now. Well, you didn't give me the FTEs. This is your opportunity, just like it is with Ms. Capasso. This is the opportunity for you guys to say, here's what we need to do this job, and here's where our budget's going to come in.
Right.
Not anything else coming in that's going to change that. We want to know that you have the budget that it takes to get the job done. Internal audit can do what they need to do. Compliance. You are 2 critical components of us getting out of the CIA, getting out of all the micromanagement we're getting from everywhere else. Same thing with you, Ms. Barrett. I just want the committees to know that they've given you what you've asked for, or they've at least debated back and forth that you needed it. It's not going to open checkbook. We're not going to just say, sure. We're going to debate with you why you need the people you need and make that happen. And then we're going to hold your feet to the fire. If you don't get the job done with what we've given you, then we might have the wrong person on the job. And that's where I want to go with this. I understand there's been some issues in the back, things have moved around. I want to know that you have what it takes to get the job done. Just like I want to know that Ms. Capasso has what she needs to get the job done. And if the budget if next year we lose $180 million, I'm not going to be happy with her. If next year in compliance we miss a bunch of things, I'm not going to be happy with you.
Right.
Make sure you write your budget down. You talk to your committee chair, and we're doing what you need to get the job done.
Great.
Okay.
So I have
I know you have 2
I have
issues.
2 quick slides. I think it's important that when you talk about a budget to go over the statistics related from the budget, and then talk about the capital. And then talk about the capital, because those are a very big spend. So with that, I'm going to punt it over to Mr. Gino, and he can kind of go over the statistics and how we came up with the statistics, and also how we came up with the capital budget.
Oh, okay. So you're not going to cover slide 9? Well, the key financial indicators. I just had a couple of questions on that. That's why.
I can, after if the time permits,
Okay.
I can answer that. Yeah.
I'll just go very quickly then. So on page 5, this is the statistics. So all of the volume is what feeds our really the rest of the budget. So when you look at what we're doing here, the average length of stay is actually going down, but it's really going to be a big effort because what's baked into that is a case mix index improvement, which means that our patients are more acute. So to get to a 0.3 reduction in length of stay is going to be a big feat, but we have plans through Lee Gezzi and Allen on the case management side, as well as implementing teletracking, which should help with that. Patient days, obviously it's down because that ties into the average length of stay. When we look at our admissions in total, compensated versus uncompensated, the reason we broke it out there is because I wanted to clarify. You see an 8.4% increase in uncompensated, but that is due to the fact that we reclassed what was a self-pay versus Medicaid pending this year. We fixed that to be a little bit more conservative and appropriate in terms of what class it's actually in. So all in all, the volume that we're adding is mostly in the compensated arena, and that's what's feeding the budget. I wanted to clarify that point. It was just a one-time reclass. So admissions in total are going up 2.9%. Our short stay cases are going up 4.8%. That trend is consistent with what we're seeing from the Broward Regional Health Planning Council data that shows what our neighbors are doing. That's largely governed by the managed care plans and what they're directing. Our births, we're projecting a 3.9% increase. A lot of that ties into the expansions that we're doing. Hopefully the community chooses to use our new facilities. The surgeries, we've increased that for 2 reasons. One is, we've just introduced new robots, and the other is we're, improving our patient flow in the OR. And then the rest of this is mostly outpatient. So our ED visits are going to improve in our budget. That we're attributing both to hopefully a marketing campaign, but also our patient flow in the ER. We've already had some massive improvements. So at Medical Center, when we launched teletracking, our left without being seen percentage prior to launching that was about 7%. We're down to 2% now, which is industry best. So we're making a lot of improvements there. And then the physician and outpatient visits, you'll see the large increase there, basically due to the fact that we didn't have providers this year in many of those areas. We've since hired those on, and so we'll be adding those providers in. Do we have any questions about the statistics?
It seems to me, Gino, that a lot of this is kind of rebounding from fiscal year 17. So there were 17 numbers, there was a dip in a lot of these in 18, and now your projections are improvement for the current fiscal year.
Yeah, so it's going to be,
Is that fair?
this is very aggressive, just to let you guys know. We lost in the last 2 years 31 physicians. We have been able to recruit 19 physicians since then. So there is a delta of 12 to the negative, but in addition to that, the ones that we hired, remember, they're new. So the ones that we lost had a pretty big patient base. So we're now on the rise, on the mend of rehiring, rebuilding those practices. And so this is a very aggressive budget, but we're here for.
It certainly seems that way.
And then for the capital, which is on page 10, I just wanted to explain our process. Excuse my choking. I can't seem to get rid of the tickle, but anyway. It's broken down in two areas. One is the infrastructure and renovations for the signature projects. That's capital money that's already approved in the queue, so it's rolling over into the future. And then the second piece is by the regions. So what we did was we met with all the facilities, and we have an immense amount of backup data by line item if anyone would like to see that in a one-on-one. But what we did was we prioritized the areas of focus by each facility and what their needs were. And the needs that they have also ties to their budget. So, for example, there's infrastructure needs, which are just necessary for the facility. We have a component of that. They're all rated based on priority. And then we, as a system, made sure that it all tied into the strategic plan. The new process moving forward, which is a new process, is to get capital approved. A, it has to be on the list, and B, they also need to provide an ROI and basically a white paper explaining what it is that they're doing, so that we have some backup tied to why we're doing what we're doing. So that's a new process going forward. The $21 million on top is the only other thing I'll talk about quickly. That is there's about $10 million of that's in rollover outside of the signature projects that we're holding, that's pretty much already committed. The other $10 million of that I'm holding back in a corporate bucket, because as we go along throughout the year, there's always going to be some unforeseen things that you really need to do that weren't planned for. An example for this year was the bidirectional amplification. That was a multi-million-dollar project that was unforeseen. So we're going to be holding that and plus we don't know what happens with our days of cash on hand, so we need to have a little bit reserved from the capital standpoint so that we can support infrastructure if we need it, and then we'll release that throughout the year as we go along. Does anyone have any questions on that? Okay, thank you.
You doing all right?
I'm joking, apparently.
I just have a couple questions about slide 9, and this is a slide that I have continuously talked about through the years, or the year and a half I've been here. Our numbers relative to Moody's A-rated and medians is pretty good. Our cash on hand is getting there. Our cash to direct debt is pretty strong. I know the accounts receivable, it's been a concern as to why it grew, and I think you were going to come back to us with an answer as to what you're doing there and what the plan is there. But we need to reduce the accounts receivable number of days and get us back there. But if I look at capitalization, the line item that really concerns me the most is the average age of plans. And I think at some point here in the next couple of meetings, I think we need to talk about where we are and what our long-term strategic plan is to get our plant capital in line with where a median or an A-rated. what are we doing and what's our plan for long range facility upgrades to keep us state of the art? Because I think it's a concern where we're almost 50%, 40% higher than the average. And I think it's a problem when you look at our facilities from a long-term capital standpoint. So we need to get a handle on that, and I think we should address that. And I think it's probably through building or wherever, but I think we definitely need a plan. And then if I look at the bottom two lines, operating margin, obviously it's getting better, but I think we need I'd like to see pro formas and projections in the future, which you think you can get to, and start to move us towards, in a faster pace. And it's not going to happen overnight, but it might take 3 to 5 years. But I think we need to, let's set some long range targets, and let's start thinking about how we can plan to get there from an operation standpoint, because it's getting better, but we're not there yet. But all of these things are going to help us. And I think it's going to help us from the rating standpoint when they evaluate our organization. If we can get an upgrade in our rating, all these things will help us from a financial standpoint. And I think it's going to go a long ways to improving our efficiencies.
Okay, noted.
Yeah, and I'm not expecting to address it today. Let's just focus on it after we get past the budget meeting, and and let's move towards it. So
thank you. With that is going, I know we're on a time constraint and we're already running in. Unless there's any significant material questions, that's going to end my budget presentation.
Well, just to clarify though, on the operation margin, that is pre-tax revenue.
Correct.
So that's a very important distinction, where what you're going to find in these Moody's numbers is a for-profit bank. So we have a substantial amount of uncompensated care that, if you were to look at operational margin, which I will tell you, Moody's does look at our operational margin post tax revenues. I think the numbers would be substantially different. Now, that's part and parcel from an effort to drive tax revenues down through better operations, more efficiencies, and so on, which I could say with confidence we're all supportive of. But I think from a statistical standpoint in these numbers, it's not an apples to apples comparison. So,
no, and I didn't mean to suggest that we're going to get to a operating efficiency of for-profit hospital, but if we can get halfway there over the next 5 years, that would be a huge improvement, and would say a lot about our ability to operate a system. I don't know, that's a challenge, but I think we can make substantial improvement, and we are. We got to stay focused there.
I agree, but it doesn't have anything to do with what the Moody's companies do, is my point. Once you add the tax revenues, I can tell you our numbers compare very favorably, but if we can get more efficient and drive the tax revenues down, all that does is it ends up being a wash. So if you were to look at these numbers on a real true apples comparison, from a financial perspective, we should be A-rated, okay? No two ways about it. Mm-hmm. We have other issues that are much more subjective, because I've spoken with these folks and I've dealt with this in my prior life, okay? We are addressing a lot of those things. It relates to stability of management. It relates to having a strategic plan and demonstrating your tracking on that plan. And I'm hopeful that we'll have some meetings here coming up with rating agencies, and I think that we have a strong argument for upgrading.
Sure.
Okay. Do you have anything else?
That's it.
I just want to apologize to half of the audience, because in regular organizations and corporations that are for-profit or not in the sunshine, a lot of this stuff gets done in private, and they go to the meeting, everything's already resolved, and then they come out with a coherent statement that says, here's what we did and here's where we're going. In this situation, you're going to see how the sausage is made, and I apologize if it's not pretty, but that is how we have to operate. And to the staff, I feel bad for, because they get surprised by some of this stuff and sometimes aren't prepared to do it. We meet 12 times a year, and a couple others possibly. We really are charged with a massive responsibility, and $150 million, give or take, in tax revenue. I think that's bigger than the city of Fort Lauderdale's take in the ad valorem taxes. It's a pretty significant burden on the taxpayers. We need to do, and I know these commissioners that I'm sitting with are all committed to doing the job, and I know the staff is. We may not all agree about how to get there, but I do think we are trying. I would ask you before the next board meeting to try as best you can to understand this budget. And if you have questions before the meeting, ask, find out. Look, these are really, really complicated, and a lot of this stuff in here, you're talking about 5 facilities essentially, with some other things that are complicating factors and a lot of market forces that we don't control. So please understand them so that when we do agree to the budget, that we all feel really comfortable in the next couple of weeks. So with that, motion to adjourn?
So moved. Second.
Okay. There you go, I got you at the gavel. I didn't wait for that, I'll get you.
The rest.